Hi, welcome to another Scaling Up podcast with me, Jared Cairns from ETS Business Services.
And me, Michelle from Holler HR.
So today, following on from the last conversation we had, we said we'd talk about psychological safety in the workplace.
We did.
And we talk about why that's important from a people point of view, and also how that fits in with your whole strategic view of the business. Because I think when you talk about psychological safety, it can feel like we're moving away from the strategy side of what we do, but it's so important, isn't it, with that psychological safety of the people? Because we've talked quite a lot, haven't we, that our main focus, and one of the reasons why we got on so well when we first met, was because our overarching focus of the business is people first. So I think that's why we decided to do psychological safety.
Do we need to roll back and think about what psychological safety is?
Yes, I think it would be a good idea to sort of frame it really in terms of what it is, because you're right, actually. So it's important, isn't it? Because psychological safety, well-being, there's a kind of a fine line, and we'll cover well-being in a future episode. I think it would be good if you want to start off on that bit.
And actually, this is where I'm thinking we should have had a clear definition and written it down somewhere. But ultimately, for me, psychological safety is someone feeling safe to bring their whole psychology, as in their thoughts, their thinking, their way of being at work, into that workplace environment, and feeling comfortable with sharing those kind of aspects of their thinking and the way they potentially approach the work or the task, without that fear of actually, there's a judgment here, or I'm not good enough. So I think for me, that psychological safety piece is about effectively that mantra of bring your whole self to work.
Yeah. I think you're right, because there's people talk about this a lot, and I've put my sort of counselling head on as well. It comes up a lot in conversation, not just within the workplace, but generally in various situations. But the workplace comes up a lot, is that people feel that they have to put a mask on at work. And as you've just said, then showing up as your whole self. People don't feel they can do that in work. It's like, they're this person at home, and then in the morning you take a deep breath, you put your mask on, you put your game face on, all these things you hear people say, and then they go into work and pretend to be something that they're not, because they feel that there's an expectation of on them or of them that isn't the real them, and they're trying to then fit into this model that doesn't feel comfortable, and then you're not getting the best out of people.
Yeah, and actually, I know we're not talking about that today, but that neurodiverse element of someone who potentially does have a neurodiversity, masking is very a kind of common phenomenon within people within neurodiversity, where they will openly mask and learn how to be in an environment. And like I say, it's not necessarily the focus of today, but a similar principle around, you learn how to be in an environment and you mask and you present differently to fit in. And I think that psychological safety piece is about actually not fitting in. Obviously, you want to align to the culture and the values of an organisation, but actually respecting everyone's diverse way of thinking, way of being, way of approaching something, to come and deliver their best work for a company, rather than feel like they do have to mask or they have to be someone different. As you quite rightly said, take that deep breath and then be someone else as you walk through the door.
I think you touched on an important point there around the culture of a business as well, because depending on the size of your business, if you've got 3 or 4 people working there, it's probably a little bit easier to do. But if you're a bigger business with lots of people, trying to accommodate everybody's individuality within a group culture, it can be really difficult. So it's walking that fine line, isn't it, of allowing people to be themselves and feel psychologically safe in an environment, but without almost having so many rules and so many bits of culture and so many this that actually you don't have a culture at all then, because you're trying to be all things to all men. So it's finding that common ground, isn't it, that allows people to be themselves within a culture.
And I think that leads us on to think about how do you do that? One of the things we talked about before we joined the podcast today was about that clear communication. How is that clear for everyone? How is that culture and that clarity of being psychologically safe as an organisation brought to the forefront for people? How do your employees, so if you're running a business and we're talking about psychological safety today, how do you as a business owner know that you can enable your workforce to feel psychologically safe? What is it that you can do?
Yeah. I think it follows on a bit from the last podcast when we talked about performance management and how you do effective performance management. And that, I think the reason why we did this next was because it does segue really nicely into psychological safety. And, one of the things we talked about last time was it's okay to fail.
Yeah.
And that fits in with psychological safety. Is when people at work, do you feel safe enough to say either A, I've made a mistake, or B, the thing I've tried hasn't really worked, or C, I have no idea what it is you want me to do.
Yeah.
And how safe do people feel in that? And does that thought, and I think we've probably all been there at various points. When you worked a few years of your life, there's probably always been jobs where you look back and you think, there are certain managers or certain organisations I wouldn't have dared to say, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do here. Or actually, this has gone really wrong. I'm going to cover this up, and I daren't tell my manager this has gone wrong, because I know the reaction I will get. To me, when we talk about psychological safety, it's enabling people to try things and be okay with it not going quite right first time. And how does that fit in there with how you approach it? Can you go to your manager and go, look, this deal that I'm working on, it's just gone belly up because I forgot to tell the customer this, or I forgot to put this in a quote. And there's a learning there, there's a coaching, there's a, let's not make the same mistake twice element to it. But it is how safe do people feel in their environment that they can do the job and experiment and try things and be expressive in their work without the fear of, I can't do that because I'm going to get shouted at.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to be open to mistakes in an organisation and allow people to try and fail and learn quickly from that. And also, on the flip side of that, have real accountability. So you said something really interesting there about there are organisations where I'd maybe try and cover it up. And I think, although from an integrity point of view, a lot of us would like to think we wouldn't do that, I think that's where psychological safety for me really kind of is defined, where you think, I'm actually going to get in trouble if I admit this. And I think, as you described it there, that accountability of, I've tried this, it hasn't worked, or I was in the middle of this and I've dropped a ball with something, and I'm taking that ownership, I'm being accountable for that going wrong, but ultimately it has gone wrong. This is how I'm going to fix it. I think is such an important approach to allowing people to feel psychologically safe in their environment at work, and thinking, actually, people do feel safe to make mistakes, do feel able to be accountable and hold their hands up to those mistakes and take ownership of fixing those mistakes. That environment and that culture kind of breeds the right approach to work, because none of us are perfect. We're all humans, we all make mistakes. And I think ultimately allowing people to have that it's okay to fail kind of mentality just does enable people to, kind of take accountability when it does go wrong, rather than kind of hide in the shadows and try and cover things up, because that's not an environment any of us want to work in. And like I say, integrity wise, I don't think any of us would feel comfortable that was how we approach things. But I think the reality is sometimes people will out of fear, and I think maybe fear is a good word to touch on, because that is the complete kind of counter to that psychological safety.
You're right, fear does drive a lot of that behaviour, doesn't it, around psychological safety. If people are fearful of a consequence or of a person or of an attitude that surrounds the culture of the business, then you're not getting the best out of people, because they are scared to be expressed. And I think we've talked in other episodes and in general, we talk about that people, processes, systems and data wheel. And again, I think with psychological safety in that, it's being able to honestly examine, well, what did go wrong? And again, not being afraid to say, look, the mistake has been made. I know we're talking a lot about mistakes here, and we'll move on to other aspects of it, but a mistake has been made or something hasn't gone quite right, is feeling safe enough to say, listen, yes, it might have been me that made the mistake, but it's because the process hasn't worked or the system didn't give me the information that I needed to be able to pass on to someone or to understand it, or the data was wrong and I made this mistake because the data was telling me X and I went and did that, but actually it should have said Y. So it's, again, within the safety of people then is to be able to honestly say, and as a manager or as a leader as well, to be honestly say, well, okay, yeah, something else has happened here. Let's all get together and work out how we don't make this same mistake again.
Yeah.
And people feeling that they're supported in that.
Yeah.
We've got to be realistic within that, that there will be elements that sometimes people will make avoidable mistakes. I'm trying to think of how to word this properly, and then we talk about performance management. And there are some times when you have got to be honest and say, actually, no, a mistake has been made, but the process will be dealt with fairly. And again, we come back to keep saying psychological safety. It's people know that actually the process will be done in no finger pointing. It's not going to be a scapegoat situation or anyone's going to be hung out to dry. It will be done properly. So it's almost that almost having your kind of arm around people in a confident but comfortable way that allows people to feel that they can be themselves at work within a culture and an expectation that's safe and it's fair and it's understood. Go back to the people management side we talked about last time. People understand the role, they understand the parameters of the role, they feel comfortable in the role and what's expected of them. They're more likely to give their all to the role.
Yeah, I think as well, you talked a lot about leadership there. Leadership plays such an important role in psychological safety. One thing I kind of take away from a leadership perspective is around vulnerability.
Yeah.
I think, leaders have to role model psychological safety. And if they are vulnerable and are able to say, we've tried this, it hasn't worked, we've made a mistake, that breeds that culture as well. I think people then think, actually, that's someone that I can identify with. I can see myself in that role modeling. I can see that they are accepting of failure. It's a lot easier then for leaders to kind of get that buy-in from their team because they can see that ultimately it's okay to fail and to admit to mistakes as well. I think where leaders hold people to a very high standard and role model something that doesn't exist, it's a lot harder for the team beneath them to then admit to their mistakes or kind of hold their hands up to something.
If that attitude of finger pointing goes wrong, from a leader point of view, you're right, then people don't feel comfortable in their own part to play in it. And I think you're right, sometimes leaders need to, if the strategy isn't working, is for the leadership to stand up and go, we got the strategy wrong. And that's okay. And it against choice of language, do we fail? Is it a failure? Or is it things just haven't quite worked out the way we wanted them to? It's looking at things like that, isn't it? How you use language in the workplace and what language you use when you're dealing with challenges, rather than problems, the challenges rather than problems. Is it failure or is it just didn't quite work? Let's work out how we do that again. So the choice of language and how people use language is really important, isn't it? How you deal with people. But you're right, that ultimately comes from the leadership, isn't it? And the things we've talked about is in having clear communication, as you said in the earlier part, of people understanding the roles and their place within the organisation, not just from a performance point of view, but where do they fit socially within an organisation as well? And what does that social side of the business look like? Where do people fit in?
And I think you're absolutely right. We talked about mistakes or challenges or however we want to term that, failure. But it's not just about that in psychological safety. It's not just about being comfortable with things maybe not going as well. It's also valuing people for the differences and accepting, I guess, conflict is okay. I know you mentioned earlier about, people sort of saying, well, I've tried this and it didn't quite work. How do you think psychological safety fits in with that, where you've maybe got a team and people approach things differently? What do you think is kind of a healthy culture there?
Again, to me, it comes from the leadership down and his understanding people. So again, yes, there's a culture, yes, there's a way that a business works, it's having its values, its value statements and mission statements on the wall and all those things that we all know and love. But it's how you do genuinely embed them within the culture, isn't it? And understanding your individuals within your team and what makes them tick. And not just within the workplace as well. We talk about people putting masks on. And people put masks on for lots of different reasons. And it's not just because when they walk into work, they need to be somebody in work. It could be they've got a life going on outside of that is really challenging. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And so you put your mask on. I'm not in my work, my home life mask, and I need to pretend that's not happening. And when you start to understand your people and understand what their environment is or what they think about themselves sometimes as well, again, touching on some of the counselling stuff, what people's self-worth is and their self-concept, what do they see of themselves, and helping understand that. When you know then how to deal with that individual in their frame of reference, it can make all the difference. Again, in valuing people is, what are people's fears? How do they wear a mask? Do we understand what's going on outside of work? If somebody does need an hour off to go to an appointment with a loved one, do we understand why? And again, rather than people having the fear of, oh God, I can't tell them I need an hour off because it's frowned upon to have time off. And again, it's got to work within the confines of the organisation. But I think the question is how can leaders make that psychological safety feel like it's real again, rather than just a mission statement. We look after people's psychological safety in the handbook. It's usually a little throwaway line, isn't it? But to truly do it is to truly understand the individual and what makes them tick, which again goes back into that performance management regime, doesn't it? Of coaching and learning and understanding what people are all about.
Yeah, and I think I touched on it earlier and talked about people with potential neurodiversity, and it's not an area that I profess to have a real kind of knowledge of. But I guess coming back to, is it okay to disagree? Is it okay to approach things differently? It's getting to know people's ways of thinking, ways of working, ways that they might approach a particular piece of work, or the way they might deliver a particular task, for example. We're not all the same, and something else that could be a whole topic in itself, and we might look at in the future, is that unconscious bias. I think being a psychologically safe leader is accepting people for their differences. So we're not just building a team of mini uses. And I think we've probably all been guilty of that in the past. We interview people, we think, oh, they're just like me, I could get on with them. But is that the right thing to do? We all know what we think in our heads. We all know what we think is the answer. The whole point of having kind of a team is to get that real diversity of thought and way of doing things. And like I say, someone who might have a more neurodiverse kind of aspect to how they deliver a particular task might say, I think we should do it this way. And if you're in your head with your unconscious bias of, well, I wouldn't do that, so why on earth would we? Then you won't get the best, and you also won't consider other schools of thoughts or ways of doing things. So you're just coming at it from your perspective rather than that kind of wider team. And I think, as you absolutely say, getting to know people, understanding what makes them tick, understanding what their career aspirations are, what elements of tasks that they enjoy, what particular skill set they have, what drives them to do a good job in the morning, aligned to that, overall culture and mission. But ultimately, if they are someone who loves a spreadsheet and you are absolutely clear that you want to do everything on Microsoft projects, and they say, actually, there's a different way of doing this, and we can embed formulas, or we can do X, Y, Z, listen to them, because actually that might be the better way of doing it. It might not be, but you've considered it. And I think if people feel psychologically safe to do that with their leader, with the rest of their team, with their colleagues, with their peers as well, you're just going to bring that richness of thought and diversity of thought to the organisation, which can only drive things forward.
And again, it's that communication word that comes into it, doesn't it? People do come up with some good ideas sometimes. Oh, why don't we try it this way? And sometimes the ways they just won't work in that organisation for a myriad of different reasons. Systems doesn't work like that. The way that the rest of the organisation feeds information in and out of different departments, it might just not work. But it's that communication of explaining to people, that's a great idea. Unfortunately, it won't work because. And again, but please don't don't think we're ignoring you. It's, don't ever not come with ideas.
Yeah.
Because when they work, we'll embed them. When they don't, we'll explain to you why
Yeah.
they don't. So at least then people feel, like you said, that they've been listened to and understood.
Yeah.
And understood in people's, not just around neurodiversity, but just people's learning styles and communication styles. Some people are brutally direct.
Yeah.
And they'll just tell you yes or no.
Yeah.
And that could feel a bit, I need to tell them that that's not the way you speak to me, kind of thing. And some of that's a bit of ego that fits in, isn't it? But if that's their communication style, it's understanding that that's their communication style and they're free to communicate in that way. Again, got to be careful of the borderline that people could overstep the mark with that. And there is a fine line, isn't it, between that's just someone's communication style and being inappropriate.
Yeah.
But that's probably another topic of conversation somewhere down the line. But it's understanding, again, if you truly know your people, you'll know when someone's just being themselves in the way that they communicate, or whether they're being inappropriate and overstepping what is acceptable within a culture and an organisation.
Yeah, I think you're right, and it comes down to that that culture piece again, doesn't it? Around actually what experience are people coming to this with? I think I've touched on it in a previous episode. My background is quite diverse from a sector perspective. So I've worked in HR my whole career, but with lots of different sectors. But some sectors, when I've joined those organisations in my employed life, just didn't feel psychologically safe because I didn't have that background. I didn't come from that sector. I hadn't grown up within that sector. I was coming at something with a completely different set of skills and experience and knowledge, and not wrong, but for that organisation, the culture fit didn't feel right. And from that, I, whether that was conscious or subconscious, I learned that this isn't a psychologically safe environment for me. I'm not free here to be myself. I'm not free to talk about, actually, I've done it this way before. Why don't we try this? Could we look at this? Because there was an inference, and it was, and this is just my personal experience, but it was an inference of, we know best, we've done this before, and we've, this is how we do this in the sector. And I think
your opinion is not valid then.
And it's that, how do you feel valued, and how do you feel celebrated for those differences or that diversity of experience? And I think again that comes down to that leadership role modeling, that culture piece around actually everyone's views and opinions and experiences are really valid here, and how do we listen to everyone? How do we encourage people to speak up and talk about what's, kind of what they've seen before work well, what they've seen in different organisations, what might work differently here, rather than, really think about, like, it's got to be done a certain way because this is how we've always done it. And if anyone does speak up and isn't kind of aligned to what we expect, then it just gets disregarded. Because I think that, as humans, we take all of that personally. We try not to, but we do. And then, then you do think, I'm not psychologically safe here to speak up and kind of share my thoughts and opinions.
Just as you were talking there, a kind of situation came to mind that took me back a few years of, we talk about leadership and the way they model behaviour, and it not being, this is how I did it, so you should do the same. And again, understanding that people have a different work-life balance. You get some people who are work, and they're quite happy to stay till 8 o'clock at night. And then you get the people at 5 o'clock, I've done my day's work, and I'm now going to go and pick my children up, and I've got to go shopping, and I've got etc. I won't name the organisation, obviously, but a place I used to work at, the MD used to stand at 5 o'clock, he'd stand at the door and frown and with his arms folded, glaring at people as he walked out the door at 5 o'clock. And he was fuming because, in his eyes, particularly the salespeople, they should be there till 7 o'clock. They should be doing this. That's what I did when I. And he would physically stand. He was a big bloke as well, and he'd stand at the door, glaring at people. And then people were then trying to go down the fire exit stairs to avoid going out the front door. And again, that's that fear. Fear that, God, I can't be seen to be going home to my family at 5 o'clock and my children, and you don't know whether people are either single parents or whether they've got ill people. It doesn't really matter. It's completely irrelevant, really, why people want to go home at 5 o'clock. The contract says they finish at 5 o'clock. You don't get paid till 7 o'clock.
No.
So again, to me, when you talk about culture and leadership modelling behaviour, that's an extreme example, but it's a true example. And I'm sure, if anyone's watching, people could probably tell their own stories of similar things, the way that, you know, managers model behaviour. You know, if you're not in, you know, an hour before your work starts, well, you're late then, because you know, if you're coming in on time, it's that kind of cultural nonsense, isn't it, that then does make people scared of just coming in and going on when the job tells them to do. You know, I've always been of the opinion with that, you know, if people are working till 7 o'clock, there's something wrong with the organisation.
Yeah.
Because
And it's just presenteeism.
Of course, it's performative.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And people would stay till 6 o'clock and play solitaire on the computer just to look like they're there till 6 o'clock, you know.
Yeah.
It's absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
So again, I think, you know, we look at people's safety and not fearing being in an organisation, or fearing being themselves, or fearing, God, I can't have a life outside of work because it gets frowned upon. That to me is quite damaging to people.
Yeah, definitely. And like you say, I guess that's probably an extreme example, but having a leader who, through body language, through, you know, approach, whatever it might be, kind of is quite clear about that, then you will only attract people who fit in with that mould. And that's where we talk about, actually, that diversity isn't there in that organisation. That leader sounds like they want people who are, you know, 7 a.m. till 8 p.m. and no other life outside. But what you're actually doing there is you're kind of taking a big section of the workforce that just don't fit in with that, but that could actually bring an awful lot of skill and knowledge and experience into your business, but they won't touch your business. You know, if they join your business and that's the approach, those people will leave, and people have the freedom of choice to look for other roles. So I think in that kind of leadership approach and that role modeling, you will just massively turn people off, because like you say, that fear of not being able to have anything else going on for them. You're just looking for, you know, kind of mini me's and role models, like kind of you know, further people that look and feel like he does in that organisation, which you'll never get that diversity.
No.
But interestingly, just thinking while you were talking there, I've had a couple of conversations this week with leaders talking about that difference, and I think we probably touched on it in the performance management podcast that we did, but thinking about the difference between leadership and management, and being a lot more hands-off as a leader as well, to almost say, this is what we are trying to achieve, but you do that how you want to do it. And that that manager, that micromanager, is just never going to work. So, you know, we talk about psychological safety, and if you're micromanaging your team, you're not giving them the freedom of expression to say, actually, we're still going to get to this, but we think we can do it this way, and that's, I feel more comfortable doing it that way. That leans into my kind of expertise and my skills, so why don't we do that? That person who's at this end of that leadership manager spectrum almost should be saying, that's the end goal, you tell me, you know, how do you get there? And I think that again encourages that psychological safety, rather than as a micromanager it's very draconian, this is what we do, you know, kind of piece by piece, and there's no room for deviation around that. You don't enable someone to be empowered and bring themselves to work.
I'm conscious we're probably coming to the end. We've talked a lot more than I thought we'd talk about the psychological safety.
You were worried about this topic.
I was, but because it kind of sits somewhere between the performance management and the well-being, but actually as a standalone topic, it's actually really important, isn't it? And I think the thing we haven't touched on too much in this, and we'll probably maybe cross over into the well-being, is around your policies and your procedures as well. These things, having like an anti-bullying policy and your whistleblower policies, and your even things like a suggestion box where people can feel they can actually get things off their chest in a confidential environment, and it be truly confidential and truly supportive that if there is a problem, particularly if you're working in services, as in sort of care services, those kind of things, you know, things having like a whistleblower policy or an anti-bullying policy where people do feel safe to be able to say, I've seen a problem and I need to report it in a confidential way. It doesn't come back on me, or whatever the situation is. I think, you know, having your policies in place really securely, really soundly, again, that people understand and value that they are genuine, not just, you know, we talk a bit, don't we, about tick box exercise, policies and procedures that they actually mean something. Again, fits in that, do people feel safe in their work? Do they feel safe that if they see somebody else doing something that isn't safe, that they're okay to step forward and not be penalised or punished because they've had the courage to sort of say there's something's wrong here and it's damaging people, so I think that's really important as well. Maybe we'll pick up on that.
I could talk policies all day.
Exactly. We could be here all day. But I think for psychological safety, I think we've probably covered a lot there. It'd be good then how that sort of transpires over into, not transpires the wrong word, then it transposes into well-being within the workplace. And again, what does that mean? How do we help people with their well-being? That shores up the psychological safety.
Yeah, definitely. So just to touch on that in policies, I spoke to a business owner earlier this week, really small team, handful of employees, and they didn't have any policies as such. It's a handful, but not really kind of following the employee journey. They were more for the regulator in the sector that they operate in. And I suggested a whistleblowing policy, which, was kind of met with very blank, like that wouldn't kind of even mean anything in this organisation. And even though it's a small business, because I understood the sector straight away, I said, this could happen, and that presents a health and safety risk. Who do your team go to if you're not listening? And it was almost like a light bulb moment of, oh, okay, yeah, I can understand now why actually whistleblowing is something that's needed. Whereas, I think a lot of small businesses think policies are just for big corporates, but actually to have something that's not a tick box, but actually have a policy so there's a clear pathway through, people understand how it applies to them, people understand how it sits within the wider context of the business, just protects you. Because if you do ever end up in tribunal because someone's not happy with how you treated them and they've been dismissed or they've had to leave or whatever the context might be, that's just one line of defence to say we actually had a really clear policy that explained what to do if that circumstance arose. So I'm sure we can do an episode on policies at some point.
I think it's more criminal, isn't it, to have a policy and not follow it than to not have a policy at all.
Exactly. And it's worth doing because it doesn't have to be, a 20-page document with appendices and, cross-reference, but it has to just be a clear pathway. So this is how we manage this situation in this organisation, and that's all the policy is. It's a framework. Well-being, I think, is our next topic. Is that what we're saying?
And then policies, probably.
Yeah, probably. But every time, I love doing this because every time we talk about something, we go, oh, that would be quite good for another conversation. I don't know, we have these conversations anyway, but why not record them? And hopefully someone gets some value from them. But thank you very much for joining us today. If you did get value from it, leave us a comment. If you spotted something in this that you thought that would be a great topic for a future podcast, let us know and we will put it on our list. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Jared.